Villains are destined to die. Chapter 1. Everything was perfect. That included my tiny half-basement studio apartment, which was no bigger than a bathroom in the house I used to live in. Even the fact that I needed to start a part-time job straight away, next week, to cover my living expenses was great. I'd left that hellhole of a house and was finally free. That alone was more than enough to make me happy. But then, I thought I told you to make yourself scarce, the man said. He was looking at me like I was a cockroach he'd found living under his bed. You acted like a lunatic at the Crown Prince's return celebration, I'm told. I was used to the look of hatred on his face. It was like he wanted to trample me out of existence this very instant. I'd gotten plenty of those looks in that house, but it wasn't something you ever got used to. What the hell were you thinking? I found his penetrating gaze unsettling, and my lips quivered of their own accord. It was at that moment a white rectangle, like a window on a computer system, appeared within my vision. The window was filled with text. 1. How should I know? 2. I wasn't really thinking. 3. In an ingratiating tone. Well, you see, what the hell is this? I opened my mouth to say whatever popped into my head, but my throat felt like something was stuck in it, and I couldn't make a sound. I stood there speechless as the blue-eyed man threatened me. You better start talking, he said. He looked ready to kill me at the slightest provocation. I would die if I didn't say something quickly, so I instinctively chose the third option. Well, you see, the words that came out of my mouth were identical to the selection I'd made in the rectangular window. What in the world? My mouth hung opened. I couldn't believe what was happening. In fact, I had no idea what was going on at all. I'd opened my eyes to find myself lying on my back in an unfamiliar location. Sinister-looking strangers had suddenly appeared above me, scowls on their faces. My head was still fuzzy, like I wasn't entirely awake yet. Well, you were saying, pressed the closest man, face set in an intimidating frown. My response hadn't satisfied him. More text appeared in the window, floating in my vision. 1. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. 2. The stupid maid made a mistake. 3. Those lowlifes snubbed me. Me, the only daughter of the House of Eckhart. I had no time to ponder what exactly was going on. Peering timidly at the man, I quickly made my choice. It was important to keep the conversation going in a situation like this, even if I didn't really know what it was about. I'd learned that lesson well from experience. I'm sorry, I began to say, picking the first option. If an apology solved things, we wouldn't need to be having this conversation in the first place. The man said, cutting me off. Maybe my choice hadn't really mattered. His biting tone made my stomach plummet. I flinched. Penelope Eckhart, he said coldly. Penelope Eckhart, you are prohibited from using the Eckhart name for the foreseeable future. I knew that name and dialogue by heart. My head flew up and I got a better look at the man. I hadn't been able to study him closely before, flustered as I was. He was standing a slight distance away from the bed. He wasn't a part of that house, but instead a foreigner I had never seen before. His eyes were as blue as the sea, his hair black like obsidian, and above his head was a long, thin bar reminiscent of the remaining battery indicator on my phone. There was also text made up of shimmering white letters. Affection score. Unless my eyes were playing tricks on me, the words above his head read, Affection score. You will attend no balls, nor will you leave your room. During this period you shall consider what you did wrong and how you will act in the future. What are you looking at? Said the man, a scowl appearing on his emotionless face. I kept staring at the spot above his head, too distracted to respond. Affection score 0%. No way, I shook my head, almost without realizing it. This was preposterous. Well and truly impossible. So you really are crazy, just like they say. The man said with a disdainful glare, noting my strange reaction. He turned away and walked to the door with hurried steps, like he wanted to escape as quickly as possible. The words affection score 0% grew smaller. What did I do wrong? I wondered to myself, staring after the man in a daze. Hearing someone scoff, I turned and found the other stranger, a pink-haired man, standing in the shadows next to the door, his arms crossed. He had the same blue eyes as the man who'd just left, but his contained open derision. Affection score -10%. White letters glowed atop this man's head as well, and the score was in the negative. Stupid bitch. Serves you right, said the man, his coarse words belying his pretty face. He turned to leave as well, letting the door slam shut behind him. I was now alone in the room. I sat there for a while, stupefied. I couldn't wrap my head around what had happened. After what felt like hours and hours of ruminating, I realized that both men had seemed familiar, even though I'd never seen them before. "You've got to be kidding," I muttered. Apparently I could talk now that I was alone, the invisible hand gripping my throat gone, but I barely noticed. I couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed so absurd. This can't be real. There was no way that the game I'd been playing right before going to sleep was now my reality, and with me as one of the characters, no less. I must be dreaming right now. That was the only rational answer, but no amount of pulling my own hair or pinching my cheeks seemed to wake me up. No, this can't be happening. Penelope Eckhart was the villain in the latest and hardest dating sim. She was also the protagonist of its hard mode version. Chapter 2. The love child of a rich conglomerate family. The words have quite a romantic ring to them, especially if that love child is a girl. In novels and dramas, such girls were protagonists, akin to Cinderella. Reality was different, however. After my mother died, I gained 2 half-brothers. They harassed me nearly to death. They ignored me and cursed at me in turn every single day. They did vile things to my food and my living space, and ruined my school life by inciting the other students to exclude me from their friend groups. This was possible because my dastardly second eldest half-brother was close to my age, and we attended the same school for a year. My plight at school didn't improve after he graduated. My father's first wife had passed away from a chronic illness long before I was born, but my lunatic half-brothers treated me like I'd killed her or something. They treated me so despicably that even I grew confused at times, wondering if I truly deserved to be treated that way. Maybe I'd placed a curse on their mother, while I was only a squirming little sperm cell in my father's body. Why else would they treat me so badly? In their house, I was worse than nobody. I actually preferred the days when I'd lived in a single-room apartment with my mother, with hardly a cent in our pockets. I lost weight rapidly, and gained new wounds and scars, almost like some kind of sick compensation for my weight loss. My father, who'd brought me into his house, didn't seem to care at all. "Why didn't you just send me to an orphanage instead?" I wanted to complain, but no one would listen, be it a misfortune or otherwise. I'd been raised by a poor single mother. I was quick to give up. There was no point in craving affection and attention from people that treated me like I was less than an animal. I had no money and nowhere else to stay, so I applied myself single-mindedly to my studies until I graduated high school. I got accepted into a prestigious university, not because I wanted acknowledgement from my half-brothers or my father, but because I wanted to escape from that horrible house. The day I got my acceptance letter, I ran to my father with, for the first time, a bright smile on my face. "Father, look, I got accepted. They accepted me. So what? Why are you telling me?" My father didn't offer so much as a single word of congratulations, even after seeing the elation on my face. But that was okay. I wasn't there to be congratulated anyway. "Let me move out. I want to live near the university and focus on school. You can do that for me, right?" My father's emotionless stare had turned into a surprised frown. However, I didn't doubt it was an attractive suggestion to him. This nuisance of a girl was offering to leave the house of her own volition, after all. "All right, I'll help you find a place." The escape I'd been dreaming of went off without a hitch. My father was stupid enough to leave the preparations to his first son, that bastard, which meant I ended up living in a half-basement room covered in mold. But even that was okay. Everything made me happy after leaving that house. I had left behind the memories of my dark school years and was making lots of new friends. It was through these friends that I learned of the game. Daughter of the Duke Love Project. That's what it's called. It sounds like it was made for children. It was a mobile game that was extremely popular amongst my friends. The cringy title and fancy illustrations were enough to tell me what the game was about. I wasn't really interested in playing it, but it was all my friends were talking about. Deciding I'd just try it out, I downloaded the game onto my phone, as it just so happened that I had no shift at my part-time job that day. I opened the game and the first screen presented me with 2 difficulty modes to choose from: normal and hard. Normal, I said, clicking the lower difficulty without hesitation. My plan was to go to sleep after playing for just a few minutes. I booted up the game. A cutscene played, introducing the characters. The youngest daughter of the Duke, lost through an unfortunate incident when she was a child, returns to her family to take back her rightful place. A lively tune played as the innocent-looking female protagonist appeared on screen. The story had begun. The illustrations were pretty and very high quality, but other than that I couldn't really see what was so special about the game. The goal was to interact with the male protagonists and raise their affection scores. defeating villains in the meantime and accruing wealth and reputation. The game ended with a romantic confession from the love interest with the highest affection score. Well, this is more fun than I expected. The game, despite its cringe-worthy name, had a well-structured story, immersive plotline and user-friendly interface. The illustrations also helped with the player's immersion greatly. Whoever had drawn them had spared no effort to make them look good. The storyline bore a close resemblance to my own life, and I couldn't help becoming hooked. Among the male protagonists were the heroine's two older brothers. Because the game took place mainly in the Duke's mansion, the player often encountered the mean brothers who disliked their sister and picked on her whenever they could. Oddly similar to my own situation, though of course the girl in the game got far better treatment than I ever did. I was soon lost in the game as I slowly won the other characters over. It had me hooked, even though I'd intended to try it for only a few minutes. I'd never played this kind of game before, and yet I got to the ending with little difficulty. It was fun, but as it turned out the normal difficulty was too easy even for a complete beginner like me. Every love interest started with an affection score of 30%. I thought it should be called easy mode, not normal. I completed the endings for every male protagonist within 3 hours of starting the game. After that I got a notification with an image of a lock that read, "Hidden ending, 100,001. They must be insane. Why is this so expensive?" I had to pay an exorbitant price to see the hidden ending, or alternatively, complete all the endings in hard mode. Damn it, it's already past midnight. I thought for a moment. I had classes in the morning, but I didn't let myself think too long. Oh, whatever. Let's see this through. I think the sweet endings must have flipped some kind of switch inside me. I'd never have acted like that otherwise. My fingers were tingling with excitement as I clicked to start hard mode. Majestic music played, and I got a different cutscene from the one I'd seen in normal mode. Wow, now she's the player character. Oddly enough, the protagonist of the story was now someone else. Of all people, it was the villainous imposter from normal mode, who posed as the Duke's daughter. The setting of the story was different too. The timeline had been pulled further back than when the original protagonist had appeared in the story. The game felt completely different, so this is why the game is so popular. A meticulously drawn illustration of the new protagonist popped up on the screen, and I felt the heaviness in my eyelids dissipate. This was fresh, intriguing, and so different from the usual gamut of similar games, and this time I'd be playing as the villain, who treated the angelic protagonist horribly, as I tried to win over the unreceptive love interests. It filled me with a mysterious excitement. I was exuberant as I entered hard mode, and full of confidence as I'd just cleared the lower difficulty with ease. Hard mode was probably not all that different from the original experience. Perhaps it had some harder dialogue choices. I was wrong. What? Why? Why did I die again? Hard mode was really hard. It was extremely difficult to increase the affection scores with the protagonists, being a villain and whatnot. And that wasn't all. What few affection score points I managed to accrue immediately plummeted at the slightest mistake, and triggered the game over screen, and even it was special. It always showed the protagonist's death. Why is this game so violent? The illustrations were very realistic and gory. I frowned when I saw my character beheaded by the Crown Prince. What a crazy game. No matter how carefully I made my choices, my character always died. I was stumped. What had the creators of this game been thinking? I died so many times that I felt even more compelled to beat the game. Let me survive just once, darn it. My initial goal, getting to the hidden ending, was already forgotten. I wanted to keep this poor girl alive and see things through to a happy ending with anyone. It's not her fault she's the villain. The author made that decision. Besides, I felt a connection to the villain who got turned down everywhere she went, in contrast to the original protagonist, who had no trouble winning others over at all. I'm going to make sure I get the endings for those two. The older brothers had killed her again. I gritted my teeth. I'd lost count of how many times I'd died. My phone was hot in my hand, and my fingers were quivering from exhaustion. I knew I was too caught up in the game's story, but I couldn't stop my finger from reaching for the restart button again. I started from the beginning. I selected from the dialogue choices, slowly built up the affection scores, and gathered money and reputation to access different storylines. Ugh, why I died again. I was so irritated that I even considered paying for an affection score booster. If encouraging microtransactions was the end goal, the developers had succeeded with flying colors. I hated wasting money, since I was saving whatever I could so I wouldn't have to ask my family for help, but now I felt like spending the cash. I ended up not actually going through with the idea, but I stayed up the whole night trying to beat the game. I died and started over, then died again and again and again and again. The sun rose, but I still hadn't completed a single ending in hard mode. Fuck, again. I was reaching for the restart button when I finally gave in to exhaustion and fell asleep with my phone in my hands. And then when I opened my eyes, Penelope Eckhart, said the man with an empty gauge and the gleaming words, affection scores 0% over his head. You are prohibited from using the Eckhart name for the foreseeable future. I was inside the game on the difficulty mode I'd failed to beat, and I was the villain. Chapter 3. My lady. It's time you got up, someone whispered above me. I was only lightly sleeping still, and the quiet whisper was enough to wake me. I'd spent a sleepless night hoping that I'd wake from this nightmare, but somehow I eventually managed to fall asleep. My lady, said the cautious voice again. Is she talking to me? No one else had come into my room after the two blue-eyed men had left. That meant whoever was saying my lady was addressing me. Still only half awake, I didn't reply right away. I heard something rustling behind me, and only then did I wake up completely. I tensed, preparing to sit up, when I felt a sharp stab of pain in my exposed arm. Oh, my eyes flew open. Screaming, I kicked the sheets off me and stood up. I quickly rolled up my sleeve to check the source of the pain. What the? I gaped when I saw the skin under my airy pajamas. My arm was covered with needle marks, blue and bruised. If it were fabric rather than skin, I don't doubt it would have been full of ragged holes. I stared, appalled, and saw that one of the needle marks had a droplet of blood welling up, like it was fresh. You're awake, said a calm voice from beside the bed. I turned and saw a brown-haired girl with a face full of freckles. She was a maid, perhaps to save on development costs. All the maids in the game had worn the same clothes and shared similar faces. This woman, accordingly, was very plain-looking. She seemed to have hidden away the needle she'd been poking me with, as her hands were now empty, but I could see dark mockery and delight in her eyes, which were carefully observing me. What the hell is this woman doing? I didn't do anything to her. Filled with rage, I opened my mouth to speak. No words came out, as though my tongue was suddenly made of lead. Why don't I get any dialogue choices? Damn it! I had no choice but to glare at her. The maid acted like nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. I've prepared a bath for you. Please go freshen up, my lady. There was an evil smile on her face as she gathered up the sheets. She seemed to be used to this routine. I sat there biting my lip before the maid hurried me into the bathroom. There was no tub inside. The room was completely empty, except for a wash basin filled with water. It was ice cold. Dipping just my fingers in was enough to make my hair stand on end. I never wanted a bath in the first place. This is ridiculous. The game did mention the villains being treated poorly from time to time, but no scene had been this detailed. The excruciating reality forced me to accept once more that I was actually inside the game. I rolled up my sleeves and saw the bloody puncture holes again. Tears stung my eyes. This isn't right. I saw nothing like this in the... That was when a memory flashed through my mind. I remembered seeing the villain wearing an off-the-shoulder dress. The other illustrations had been flawless, but one of the villain's arms had been sprinkled with small black darts resembling moles or freckles. That's insane. I thought they were just freckles, or an important element of the story I hadn't gotten to yet. Who would have guessed them to be marks of abuse? I was flabbergasted, and also shocked once more at how fleshed out the story was. My lady, your breakfast is ready. Are you not done yet? Said the maid outside the bathroom, pushing me to hurry. That little snake. I grew irritated, but I had no choice but to dip my hands into the icy water again. I'd lived through years of harassment from my stupid half-brothers. This was nothing. Since I was a villain now anyway, I had the urge to prick the girl full of holes like she'd done to me, but I decided to wait a little longer and feel things out. Sadly, I did not have agency to do or say what I wanted. My face tingled as I wiped it with a towel. When I stepped outside, I saw that an actual meal had been prepared on a table next to a large window. Perhaps because of the confinement the Duke's first son had ordered, it seemed that I was to eat even meals in my quarters. Sit down, my lady. The maid led me to a chair. I immediately frowned. The food on the table wasn't fit for human consumption. There was a green, mouldy piece of bread in a bowl, and next to it was a grey-coloured soup in which unidentifiable ingredients floated about. Go on and eat. You must be hungry, said the maid with a grin. I gritted my teeth and glowered at her. A white rectangle appeared in front of me then. Flip the table. What the hell is this? Are you out of your mind? Call the chef right this instant. 2. Shove a forkful into the maid's mouth. This isn't even fit for the dogs. Why don't you try it yourself? 3. Eat the food. I'd gotten the game over screen 2 times at this point in the game. When I chose the first option, the Duke's servants had all run to the Duke to tattle on the villain. The Duke's first son, the same person who'd ordered her to be confined, had been enraged and forbidden her even water. She ended up dying of dehydration. In my next attempt, I went with option 2. The second son, who had been passing by the room, had rushed inside to separate the villain from the maid. In the process, she was pushed roughly and fell. A fork tumbled after her and buried itself in her throat. It was the most idiotic death ever, so that leaves only one choice. This episode in the game was probably meant to show the strife between the villain and the long-time servants of the Duke. Not wanting to see the protagonist struggling so helplessly like this from the very start, I'd moved on to a different episode after seeing 2 deaths. I'd had dozens more episodes I needed to clear. However, I couldn't see a back button that would let me go back to the episode selection screen. Damn it, I glared at the maid and forced myself to go with the third option. My body jerked into action like someone was controlling it. Picking up the spoon, I scooped a mouthful of the rotten soup. I didn't even want to smell the horrifying mixture, and my hand trembled violently as the spoon slowly approached my mouth. Grey droplets dripped onto the table, but I couldn't stop my hand. My mouth was forced open, and the spoonful of rotten soup went in. Ugh, the soup was lukewarm as it met my tongue. A terrible smell rose from inside my mouth. This wasn't food. It tasted like someone had gathered old food scraps and boiled it. My body was acting of its own accord though, and I was forced to swallow the liquid. I gasped. The maid seemed shocked, probably not expecting that I would actually eat it. Yuck, I feel like throwing up. I was gagging. Trying to keep myself from retching, I considered, that should be enough. I would not die from only a spoonful of rotten food. This was probably the end of the episode. I gave a sigh of relief, but I was mistaken. My hand did not stop. Wait. I continued to cram mouldy bread and grey soup into my mouth, and none of it was of my own doing. The maid grew paler and paler as she watched me scarf the spoiled food down like a pig. The insanity only stopped when the Duke's second son, who had been passing by, came into the room. What's going on? Lord Reynolds. The maid seemed terrified to see someone come into the room. Ugh, I choked. I wasn't paying attention, being too busy covering my mouth. I couldn't stop retching, and the contents of my stomach threatened to come back up at any moment. Why must I endure something so disgusting? I wondered. I'd experienced plenty of things like this before I'd even entered this game world. I'd had to endure many a meal of rotten food, because of the 2 fiends that lived in the same house as me, and now I was being forced to endure more of the same, this time in a virtual world. Ugh, clear drool dripped between my fingers, and my eyes were filled with tears of resentment and pure disgust. I tottered and groaned as if I'd been poisoned, and the pink-haired man standing in the doorway approached, face shocked. Hey, are you all? He froze when he noticed what was on the table. He saw the mouldy bread and spoiled soup. The food was not fit for human consumption, much less the daughter of a duke. Not even commoners would eat such garbage for breakfast, but over half of it was gone, while his adoptive sister stood pale, her mouth covered. The pink-haired man scowled heavily as he turned to the maid. What did you just give her? My lord, this is... The maid trembled, her face ashen, at the look of rage on the man's face. To be fair, I suppose she had no clue. How could an unimportant side character have known that the fake lady with her terrible personality would actually eat the rotten food? The maid was at a loss for words. The pink-haired man shouted at her, "How dare you disrespect our family like this? To think a mere maid would dare serve something like this for us to eat. My lord, that's not true. My lord," she stammered, "get out this instant. But my lord, I shall speak to my father and brother about this myself. Is anyone out there?" Penelope Chapter 4. The pink-haired man was shouting in the direction of the doorway. Soon enough, the butler and a few of the servants came running. "My lord, what is the matter? Lock this girl away," the second son demanded. "My lord, I'm sorry. My lord, please." The maid that had been harassing me all morning was dragged away, just like that. I could take no part in these proceedings, however. I was busy trying to get my lurching stomach under control. I still had a hand over my mouth as I lay limply against the back of the chair. The pink-haired man reached out, shaking my slim shoulder carefully. "Hey, are you all right?" the second son asked. "Why'd you eat that swill anyway? You should have flipped the table and screamed like you usually do, idiot." I wasn't sure if he was consoling me or making fun of me. He was faithful to his original spiteful rendition in the game. If I hadn't eaten it, I'd have died from a fork in my neck, which you would have knocked as it happens. I suddenly felt irritated. I wanted to spit out a sharp comment, but I couldn't speak without a damn dialogue box. Phew, that part's over with, I hope. I hadn't expected at all that he would be so helpful in getting rid of the maid. Not that I felt grateful to him in the least. My arm was covered with puncture wounds. I doubted that one maid was the only servant responsible. Of course not. My maid was probably the tip of the iceberg. The entire household was probably out to get me, with the man currently in front of me at their lead, giving silent encouragement. That was the basic setup for any villain story. I'd only woken up moments ago, but I felt drained already. "Hey, you look really sick. Should I call a doctor?" he asked. He seemed disturbed that I wasn't saying anything. He wasn't really worried enough to call a doctor. He was bent over me and studying my hand-covered face like he was actually worried. It was at that moment the white window appeared again. 1. None of your business. 2. What do you care? Get out of my room. 3. Don't act all nice. It doesn't suit you. The terrible reality of my situation sank in. I had to choose carefully, even now, if I didn't want to die a premature death. None of the dialogue choices written by the developers were sane, but I chose the least offensive one. None of your business. I wanted to make it sound as sincere as possible, as it most closely reflected my feelings at this moment. My voice was weak from trying to keep from vomiting. You, the pink-haired man, frowned after hearing my reply, but only for a moment. When I glanced at him again, his face was icy cold. Maybe I'd been mistaken in thinking he'd looked concerned. "All right, it's none of my concern what you eat even if it kills you," he said, straightening up. "No doctor in the Eckhart estate that has time to spare for the likes of you anyway." Thud, thud. His footsteps sounded hostile as he walked away. White letters glowed above the man's head. Affection score -3%. The affection score had gone up. I was certain it had been at -10% yesterday. This was a huge increase, considering that even bumps of a couple of percentage points were difficult to accomplish in hard mode. If I'd known the rewards were so huge, I'd have started with this episode. But I didn't care that the affection score had improved. It was still in the negative after all. After emptying my stomach, I got up and rinsed my mouth at the sink. I looked up and saw a beautiful girl in the mirror, Penelope. Not a single unscripted groan had escaped my lips earlier, but now that I was alone, I could talk all I wanted. I opened my mouth, and the girl in the mirror did the same. Her blue-green eyes shone like emeralds. She was a beauty, her azalea-like dark pink hair rippling attractively every time she moved. It was definitely not my face. Penelope Eckhart. Eckhart, damn it. The House of Eckhart was the only dukedom in the Empire of Aoka inside the game world. The episode I'd experienced yesterday, which had led the first son to confine me to my room, had been the de facto beginning of hard mode. I'd died many times before clearing that episode in the past, trying to stay true to the villain's character. I'd only selected the insolent dialogue choices. I'd been indignant that I'd died at the very beginning, and attempted it multiple times. I was now glad that I'd done so, and not just fallen asleep right away. The thought made me sigh. Ugh, she really is beautiful. The illustrations of her had been really pretty, and in real life Penelope's beauty bordered on the impossible. If I'd been sucked into this game before getting an apartment of my own to live in, I'd have been excited by this. Maybe I'd have even gladly accepted this stupendous development. I bet I'd have thanked my lucky stars for granting me a chance at a new life. But I had endured life in that hellhole and succeeded in striking out on my own. The environment had been anything but friendly, but I'd gotten accepted to a prestigious university. Though it was tiny and dirty, I'd also had a living space all to myself. All that remained for the future, after escaping the clutches of my dastardly brothers, was to continue on an upward trajectory to success. Life as Penelope was hardly superior to my own life, as the smallest mistake would immediately lead to death. If I'd reincarnated as the protagonist of normal mode, it would be different, of course. She could do anything and still get a happy ending. But why? Why now, right after I'd finally gotten out of that awful house? Why? I slammed my fist down on the sink and wailed. The pretty face in the mirror contorted with despair. There was a nasty look about her face, even though I was crying in anguish. This was the greatest villain in the game, all right. I exhaled deeply and ran a hand through my long hair, some of which had gotten in my face. I tried to remember what I could about Penelope. Penelope Eckhart. She was the villain in the dating sim and the protagonist of hard mode. She had originally been a commoner with no last name. Penelope was raised by a single mother who was a poor, wandering peddler. One day the Duke, who'd been searching desperately for his long-lost youngest daughter, discovered her. When her chronically ill mother died, she was adopted into the house of Eckhart. There was only one reason she was chosen to replace the sole daughter of Eckhart. She greatly resembled the Duke's lost daughter. The Duke's dead wife had also had pink hair, and all members of the Eckhart family had blue eyes. I recalled the second son of the Duke, who'd been in my room earlier. His hair had been a lovely shade of pink. The dark pink hair that I saw in the mirror now was closer to red than pink, however, and the eyes were blue-green, slightly different from the Eckhart blue. He should have looked harder for his own daughter. Why involve someone else? As Penelope grew up, she began to resemble the Duke's lost daughter less and less. The Duke quickly lost interest and neglected her. No longer favored by the Duke, Penelope's new lot was abuse from her two stepbrothers and the servants. The setting is so similar, it's disturbing. The story of Penelope's life prior to adoption was very similar to my own. I hadn't realized this while I'd been playing the game. My heart sank. The fake. Every servant in the house called her a fake. Penelope, though undeniably gorgeous, was nothing more than a half-assed imitation to the people here. Perhaps if her personality had been more lovable, things would have been different. Despite being an adopted daughter, her behavior had been questionable. As the game's prologue put it, she was hostile toward everyone and continued in her perverse ways with no mind for time or occasion. No wonder the dialogue choices were also hostile. I nodded to myself, recalling the pieces of insane dialogue I'd seen so far. Everything about the girl pointed to her terrible personality, even her name. Unlike the innocent and pure protagonist of normal mode, Penelope looked like a vixen, but I found that I sympathized with the girl. After today, though it had only been a few hours, I could picture the kind of treatment she'd received in the Duke's house. I mean, even if she's a fake, this was going too far. How could a maid poke needles into the arm of a girl who'd been officially adopted by the Duke? I doubted that maids did something so crazy even to each other. Penelope had been adopted when she was only 12. If this kind of abuse had been happening since then, a child like her didn't have many options against adults who were deaf and blind, as far as she was concerned. So she's a villain molded by her environment. Not that it justified her behavior up until this point, but all the characters in the game had been especially harsh on her, and had shown no hesitation when killing her. I pity her a little, I said, touching Penelope's pale cheek. Her dark pink hair made her look beautiful and plaintive. I soon pushed aside any feelings of sympathy, however. I'm in no position to be pitying anyone. I had no time to get lost in such thoughts. I was Penelope now. In other words, just as Penelope had died countless times as I played the game, so could I at the hands of the male protagonists. The thought filled me with sudden fear. Chapter 5. I left the bathroom and quickly found myself a pen and paper. I was stuck as Penelope, and I had to find a way to survive. In hard mode, affection scores built up through considerable effort could plummet in a heartbeat, and when they dropped below 0, the result was death for the player. The second son of the Duke had started with an affection score in the negative, which meant that if I didn't raise it to 0% or above, I would die no matter what. I needed to compile everything I could remember about the game. To my relief, though Penelope was an imposter, her room was still properly fitted out. I found a luxurious desk and bookcase to one side of the broad room. I went over immediately and sat at the desk, quickly dipping the pen in ink. First, the characters. There were 5 main male protagonists in the game. The Duke's 2 sons, the Crown Prince, a mage and a knight. Their affection scores would all start at 0% or below in hard mode, whereas in normal mode they would start at 30%. I began to write down everything I could remember on a blank sheet of paper. First of all, there was Derek Eckhart. He was the eldest son of the Duke, a typical nobleman. He was busy learning to manage the house and paid little attention to Penelope. However, beneath the surface, he held a deep resentment and disdain for the girl who occupied his sister's place. Derek rarely killed Penelope himself in the game, but he did not hesitate to punish her harshly whenever she did something wrong. This resulted in penalties and restricted choices for the player, just like the way he'd confined me to my room yesterday. Next, there was the second son, Reynold Eckhart. I didn't even want to waste words on him. He acted first and thought later, not to mention he was equipped with a nasty temper. He invariably picked on Penelope whenever he saw her. Not only did he take the lead in harassing her in the Duke's household, he also always contributed to her dying of absurd causes. Hey, these two resemble the 2 assholes I have back at home, I said, tudding as I looked over the information I'd written down so far. These two were the easiest to win the game within normal mode, since the relationship with them was not romantic in nature. Theirs was a familial love, because Penelope wasn't actually related by blood to either of them. The ending in this mode was likely to differ from the one in normal mode, which ended with all of them becoming a peaceful family. I shook my head firmly and drew a huge X over each of their names, even though I'd gone to the trouble of writing their information down. Those assholes are hopeless. Reynolds had even started with a negative affection score. Not 0 but negative. Why would that be the case? It was a hint from the developers. Since there was no hope to begin with, I was being told that I should not even attempt to pursue a happy ending with Reynolds. I hated treating them like actual respectable brothers anyway, and decided to give up on them entirely. Next is the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince's name was Callisto Regulus. I had no information about him, except for what I'd learned in normal mode. In the game, the tyrant who cared little for other people's lives, because of an unfortunate childhood, met the angelic female protagonist, who changed him. Then he killed the villain, Penelope. It was justice, of course, but from Penelope's perspective, the Crown Prince was an angel of death. He had actually killed her the most often when I had played in hard mode. I'd reset the game so many times while going the Crown Prince route that I couldn't really remember any details. I'm going to stay away from him. I remembered the many graphic illustrations of my head being cut off by Callisto's sword. I felt chills run down my body. Scritchy. I crossed out the Crown Prince's name multiple times and hurried onto the next male protagonist. Next was Winter Verdandi, a marquis and mage. As with most mages in games like this, he was a weirdo who hid his identity as a marquis while he operated a merchant guild. He traded in secretive objects for the black market and various kinds of information. It was access to this information that led him to discovering that the female protagonist was actually the Duke's lost daughter. He continued to gather information about the evil schemes of the villain after that, warning her or intervening himself, and was quite helpful in increasing the female protagonist's reputation. In normal mode, Winter was a sweet man who used romantic spells and did everything he could behind the scenes to help her. I couldn't really remember what he'd been like in hard mode though. I died repeatedly to the Crown Prince and the Duke's sons before I could interact with him. He had more potential than the two sons, so I left him as an open option for now. Finally, Eccles. Eccles, a knight of the Duke's house, had originally been a slave. The Duke was going to visit a friend at night when he noticed Eccles, a slave talented with the blade. The Duke had paid a high price and made Eccles an apprentice knight in his house. He later became the youngest swordmaster ever to exist, a model, young and handsome, type who made his own fortune. Currently, Eccles was the most promising of the five. He had been the only male protagonist who'd pitied Penelope to the end of normal mode, perhaps because of his sense of honor toward the mistress he'd once served. He'd been the least aggressive in dissuading Penelope from her ploys against the female protagonist. I'd never even encountered him in hard mode, of course. Come to think of it, I don't know if he'll actually be useful, I said with a deep sigh as I looked down at the piece of paper. My information about hard mode was extremely limited, as I'd never really gotten far, and even if I had more information, I had no idea how the situation I found myself in actually corresponded with the game's mechanics. One thing I could be sure of, though, was that I would die when the male protagonist's affection scores fell below 0, and that I had a limited time to find a good ending. I would have to finish the game before Penelope's coming-of-age ceremony, by means of one of the 5 protagonists, as that ceremony was where the Duke's actual daughter made her first appearance. Poor Penelope. She lost everything on the day she became an adult due to the sudden discovery of the Duke's real daughter. That was also the starting point of normal mode. If I failed to win the heart of one of the 5 by then, they would fall in love with the female protagonist, and I would likely be killed by one of them, even if I did nothing wrong. There was no guarantee, of course, that they wouldn't do that earlier. I can't die. I gritted my teeth at my gloomy prospects. No, I couldn't die. I'd only just made my escape from that horrible family house. I couldn't die inside this stupid game. I refused to die, I said. My morning classes were waiting for me. I would go back to my real home, alive and kicking. I stared into space and told myself over and over that I would survive, no matter what. That was when someone knocked twice on the door. Knock, knock. I couldn't even hide my notes about the game before the door flew open. "My lady," said a venerable, white-haired butler. He didn't come into the room, choosing instead to state his business at the doorway. "The Duke wants to see you." I doubted he could read what I'd written, but I was offended by his rude behavior. There had been a valet of sorts at my father's house. He hadn't liked me much, granted, but he hadn't ever opened my bedroom door without my permission. Not only that, this game was set in a classist society, not a democracy. The butler's behavior was inexcusable. As I wondered if I should lash out at him, the white rectangle slid into view again. 1. Throw an object at the butler. How dare you open my bedroom door without permission? Do you value your life so little, old man? 2. Tell him to come himself if he has something to say. 3. Glare at him for 5 seconds before standing up. All right. I'd forgotten again. I could do nothing of my own free will in this game, including getting angry at someone. I didn't want to behave as aggressively as the first choices, so I forced myself to choose the third option. Affection score be damned. I had to do something about these dialogue choices first. All right, I guessed it was a good thing the Duke was looking for me. Pushing my notes deep inside a drawer, I stood up and followed the butler. Everything I knew about the mansion had been from brief scenes in the game, so I studied my surroundings carefully as I walked. The mansion was enormous, something one would expect to see in a movie set in modern Europe perhaps. Penelope's room was on the 2nd floor. The day was just beginning, and the mansion was humming with activity. While we moved down the central stairway, we passed quite a few of the servants as they rushed along the corridors. They threw unpleasant looks at me as they passed, but I ignored them calmly. I was used to this sort of treatment from my experiences in the real world. I wasn't even upset. The butler, having led me to the 1st floor, soon stopped in front of an ornate door. This appeared to be the Duke's office. Knock, knock. Your Grace, I have brought Lady Penelope. Come in. The door creaked as the butler pushed it open, and I tensed a little as I stepped inside. Chapter 6. This is just a scene from the game. There really wasn't any reason for me to be nervous, but my fingers trembled all the same. I guess remembering the way the Duke treated Penelope reminded me of my own father. The Duke didn't look up, even though I had just entered the room. I cautiously approached his desk. Holding my shaking hands behind my back, I bowed politely. Bowing to the Duke was a detail that hadn't been in the game, but I couldn't speak without a dialogue box, and I figured it was the right thing to do under the circumstances. There you are, the Duke said, finally glancing up. He had black hair and blue eyes like Derek, and looked just like the illustrations in the game, cold in the extreme. A white box appeared in my vision. 1. Why did you wish to see me? 2. I'm busy. Please tell me what you want. 3. Glare without saying anything. They were all absurd dialogue choices. I kept calm and chose the first one. Why did you wish to see me? I heard there was a disturbance this morning. He responded coldly, and the contents of the dialogue box shifted. 1. It's nothing for you to be concerned about. 2. You would like it if there had been a disturbance, wouldn't you? 3. It wasn't my fault. It was all because of that stupid maid. None of the choices were reasonable considering how calmly I'd just responded. Damn it, this game is crazy. I'd experienced this already while playing on my phone, of course. At the time, I'd been excited at the prospect of turning the villain Penelope into an aloof femme fatale, and immediately selected the second answer. Now that I was actually Penelope, and had to say one of these crazy dialogue choices myself, I simply couldn't bring myself to speak. I mean, I get that she's supposed to be this insane villain, but still, who would like a daughter who behaved this way, let alone an adopted one? Damn it. Noticing that I was hesitant to speak, the Duke put down his pen and looked up from his documents. His blue eyes were harsh. Please let this choice be a safe one. Trembling internally, I went with the first answer. I gritted my teeth, trying my best to keep my tone neutral. It's nothing for you to be concerned about. My mouth moved of its own accord, however, and resisting only made me sound silly. Penelope, said the Duke. There was no warmth in his voice. It seemed my efforts had no impact on the game's outcome whatsoever. It has been 6 years since you started living here, correct? Asked the Duke. I stared, trying to remember the details of the game. Both the protagonists of normal and hard mode were 18 during the events of the game. Penelope was adopted into the Duke's house when she was 12, so 6 years after that made her roughly 18 now. I remembered something about the storyline that I'd forgotten. Her 18th birthday was her coming-of-age ceremony. Didn't that mean it was going to be soon? Then how much time do I have left? I thought hard, concerned by the revelation. Thankfully, the Duke continued talking, not bothering to wait for an answer. I'm not sure if you understand, but it's not an easy thing to be accepted into this household. Only those who have proven their worth and have been through rigorous screening are allowed to pass through the Eckhart doors. After I adopted you, I spared no expense and gave you everything that was due to my daughter. I provided even the senseless luxuries you demanded. Oh, but I am uncertain how useful you have been to the Eckhart name these past 6 years. He was right. If Penelope had at least continued to resemble his real daughter, he might have maintained a tiny bit of interest in her. However, her hair and eyes were now too different from the Eckhart pink and blue. I wanted to nod in agreement, but the game had me in a vice-like grip from the moment he started talking, and I couldn't move a finger. As I despaired, the white dialogue box popped up again. 1. So what? Are you going to kick me out now? 2. I did nothing wrong. 3. Niels, finally. These were choices I was familiar with, and I felt excitement course through me for the first time since I'd found myself in this game world. Though it was unlikely, I feared the choices might change if I didn't select one quickly. I hurriedly selected the third option. Thunk. My knees slammed onto the floor as though someone had kicked at them from behind, and then pushed down forcefully on my shoulders. Oh, why so rough? I'd been ready for this, but it hurt more than I expected. I think I shed a tear. What are you doing? The Duke seemed even more surprised than I was by the sound my knees made against the floor, his eyes wide. I had never tried this option while playing hard mode. It was so out of character. Why would I kneel when I'm supposed to be the embodiment of all that is nasty? Perhaps the developers had been too lazy to think of a more appropriate option, or maybe they'd wanted to save on expenses. This was an option that also existed while playing in normal mode. 1. There. Does this make you feel better? 2. Glare without saying anything. 3. It's all my fault, Father. I hurriedly selected number 3 again. It's all my fault, Father. I was sure this was the option I should choose, and maybe because of this my voice came out loud and clear. What? Asked the Duke, looking taken aback. That was when the white window appeared again in my vision. I was getting used to seeing it now. System. Hidden quest, Father. A forgotten name mission complete. As a reward, you will now have access to the dialogue content on /off function. System. Would you like to set this to off now? Yes. /no. I pressed yes, without hesitation. System. Dialogue content has been set to off. Please shout dialogue content on to see the content again. The stupid window vanished. Finally, I clenched my fists and gave a silent cheer. Turning dialogue off was a hidden feature in the game. The way you activated it was rather silly. You had to call the Duke Father. Turning the dialogue content off did away with the dialogue in the offered choices, leaving only the numbers 1, 2, and 3. It also gave you the option to type simple answers like yes, no, or the names of the protagonists. In normal mode, the feature had been made intentionally easy to unlock. I think the goal must have been to add a little flavor to the repetitive choices, ensure faster gameplay, and perhaps spark a little excitement in the player. I never actually used the feature after unlocking it, however. Normal mode had been so easy and quick that I hadn't really needed the feature at all. That was why in hard mode, I'd skipped over this particular scene without much thought. I'd already been choosing the most obnoxious answers I could find at that point. I had no idea this feature worked the same in hard mode, too. Back when I'd been playing the game, I'd made the wrong choice and been unable to unlock the feature. However, I hadn't needed it at the time. I'd been having too much fun with the villain dialogue choices. I had no idea then that the fun I was having would later come back to bite me in the ass, bemoaning my foolishness. I finally spoke of my own free will, pronouncing each syllable carefully. Father, I nearly cried. It felt so good to be able to say whatever I wanted again. Perhaps there were real tears in my eyes. I was so moved. The Duke's eyes seemed to grow wider, maybe from disbelief at hearing Penelope address him as father. He couldn't remember her ever doing that before. I continued to speak, my words flowing freely. I apologize for causing a disturbance during my punishment. I failed to set a good example for the servants through my manners and actions. I shall be contrite and think over my actions during the remainder of my punishment. You can rest assured that I will not repeat this behavior ever again. Will you forgive me this once, Father? I begged, going down on all fours. In reality, the events of this morning weren't my fault. The maid had abused me, and I had every right to ask for help, but the way Penelope had acted thus far in her life forced my hand, leaving me no choice but to prostrate myself to survive. I wouldn't be in immediate danger of death if I annoyed the Duke, but doing nothing about the current situation and moving on just because I unlocked a hidden feature would likely cause problems later on. That was to be expected, as Penelope had already been confined to her room for doing something wrong when the disturbance occurred. Derek had been the one to order her punishment, and being arrogant now would only cause his affection score to drop. I'm aware how reckless and immature I have been so far. If you overlook my mistakes just this once, I will prove my usefulness to you before my coming-of-age ceremony. I stayed on the ground after I was done. I'd never begged like this, even to my real father. This damned game was making me do things I never would have done otherwise. I'm begging you on the ground, damn it. Hurry up and accept already. I'd been tense ever since I'd woken up that morning, and I needed a break. The Duke gazed at me as if seeing me for the first time. He was finding it difficult to speak. He faltered, and after a while he finally managed to say, I understand. You may get up. Yes, I stood up without delay. My legs had been going numb. We of Eckhart say little, Penelope, the Duke said in a low voice, and the little we say must matter. That could mean a lot of things. I bowed deeply. Thank you. I shall make sure you don't regret offering me this chance, Father. You may leave now. I hurried toward the door as soon as I had permission, fearing that moving too slowly might trigger some other branching storyline. Chapter 7. Creak. I felt the Duke's eyes on my back as I turned the doorknob and exited the room. It felt strange, since he was acting completely different from how he had been when I entered. Having left the office, however, I decided to push it out of my mind. The Duke wasn't one of the NPCs I needed to curry favor with, and I wouldn't have any reason to see him again after I reached an ending with one of the male protagonists at my coming-of-age ceremony. I closed the door carefully and turned to leave. That was when an icy voice pierced the quiet. I thought I told you to stay out of my sight. I gasped, startled. I turned and saw a huge man standing in the corridor. The words affection score 0% shone in the gloom. The man had dark hair, which seemed to meld with the shadows, and blue eyes. The Duke's eldest son, Derek. Emily, she's a faithful maid that has worked in our house for 10 years. Derek's footsteps rang on the floor as he emerged from the darkness, crossing the broad corridor with only a few steps. He came to stand right in front of me and turned his intimidating blue eyes down toward my face. He had the look of a man who'd discovered a pest in his home. I cringed at the hatred and scorn that emanated from him, even though I hadn't really done anything wrong. No one was willing to be your personal maid, not even for a considerable bonus. Emily was the only one who volunteered to take the difficult position. Well, that ends today. Your conceited behavior has driven the last maid remaining to you away. I suddenly felt indignant. When had I said I wanted her banished from the house? His pink-haired brother had made much more of a fuss than I had. I'm the one who nearly died eating that rotten food. I wanted to shout at him, but the words affection score 0% glowing over his head stopped me. Hold it in. If that drops any further, I'm dead. I breathed deep, repressing my irritation. Affection score 0%. 0%, I repeated inside my mind. I was already drained from groveling at the Duke's feet earlier, and because I'd been so focused on disabling the dialogue options, I couldn't remember much about this scene in the game. Staying calm, I decided to use the game systems to figure out what was going on. Turn dialogue content on. 1. Did she service you in bed, perhaps? 2. She's being kicked out of the house because she deserves it. 2. Glare without saying anything. Having skimmed through my options quickly, I thought, turn dialogue content off. Off. System, would you like to set this to off now? Yes. /no, I hurriedly pressed yes. If I went with the crazy options provided by the game's developers, I'd be dead in an instant. My brain was humming, trying to think of a solution, and Derek's expression turned colder and colder at the delay. You're ignoring me now, are you? He almost seemed to be threatening me. I had no time to dally. I'm sorry for causing a scene, I said. How many more times would I have to apologize for something I hadn't done? It hurt my pride to have to continue to cower like this each time. I hated it, and it left me feeling miserable, but it would be a small price to pay if it kept me alive. These people were not even real people, but virtual characters inside a game. That girl scratched me farther. Bro, you wretched child, you act just as pathetic as you look. I'd begged for forgiveness countless times during my life with my hateful half-brothers. That hadn't been so different from my current situation. Not begging for mercy hadn't put me at risk of death, of course, but I'd been just a child at the time, and everything had been equally scary. Groveling and cowering became an everyday occurrence. Compared to the life I'd already lived, Penelope's current lot was nothing to complain about. After all, unlike myself, she had actually caused trouble, perhaps because I'd already been through much worse. It actually felt easy being inside a game in which begging for forgiveness was a promising strategy. Again, this is way too similar to my own experiences. I mentally grumbled, recalling the thought I'd had when I first found myself in this game. Then I said in an even tone, "As you said, I was arrogant and conceited." "What did you say?" "My own behavior is to blame, so you needn't fire the maid. In fact, I just asked Father for forgiveness." Derek's expression grew strange, his blue eyes slightly round. His reaction was similar to the Duke's. I continued smoothly, finding it easy to repeat the words I'd already said. "I shall stay out of your sight from now on, so you needn't worry about me. Please forgive me once more." I then gave a deep bow. Did I sound too insincere? I wondered, suddenly worried that maybe I hadn't been convincing enough. Even if this game's story could be brutal, he wouldn't suddenly cut me down when I was begging for mercy, would he? I was quite certain that Derek wasn't a psycho like the Crown Prince though, and it was with a lighter heart that I waited for his response. I wanted to get this over with and return to my room. Even standing was proving difficult now. Come to think of it, that damned maid had made me throw up in the morning, and I'd had nothing to eat since then. Despite my earnest desire to rest, it took Derek a full 5 minutes to speak. "Just this once," he finally conceded. "I shall overlook it just this once." It occurred to me that this was easier than I'd expected when he immediately added, "But remember, this is the last time I'll forgive your arrogant ways." His response was much harder than the Duke's. As expected, however, I had avoided death. I felt relief, but I couldn't bring myself to thank him for it. Yes. "Of course, Your Majesty," I thought sarcastically, just as I would often do with the first of my detestable brothers, before giving another deep bow. Then I turned around so I could go to my room immediately. I felt a sudden rush of dizziness, and my vision started to fade. The relief seemed to have taken the strength right out of my legs, and I swayed on unsteady feet. "I'm going to fall." The floor was rushing up to greet me now. Then someone grabbed me by my shoulders roughly. "Hey!" I felt 2 hands propping me up. I turned to see bright, burning blue eyes. Derek had grabbed me before I could fall. "You ate spoiled food, didn't you?" he said gruffly, sending a jolt through my body. While I stared in surprise, he asked, "Shouldn't you call for a doctor?" My inner turmoil immediately settled. So he knew. He had known it wasn't my fault, and yet had tried to blame me for what the maid had done. If I hadn't begged him for mercy right away, he would likely have tried to kill me like in the game's storyline. I felt like someone had doused me with ice water. "No, Lord Derek." I jerked my hand from his grasp, the movement almost instinctive as I didn't know what might come next. I immediately regretted my actions, however, suddenly afraid that he might be offended. I did my best to smile at him. "I just told you that you won't have to bother with me ever again, so piss off, if you'll excuse me." With another polite bow, I hurried away. I supposed I looked silly, the way I rushed down that corridor, like someone was hot on my heels. But my worry wasn't unfounded. I was afraid he might shove a knife in my back for swatting his hand away. In my hurry to escape to the central staircase, I failed to notice the look on his face. "Lord Derek, huss," Derek muttered, watching Penelope's retreating form. The girl who didn't dare address the Duke as father would saucily refer to him and Reynold as brother. Somehow, he couldn't forget the way she'd blanched when he'd caught her. There was a strange light in his blue eyes as he watched her hurry away, almost at a run. Soon, however, he turned away as if no longer interested. Affection score 5%, white letters that Penelope failed to notice glowed above his head of black hair. Chapter 8. I raced up the stairs and returned to my room. Shutting my door, I jumped onto the bed. Phew, my body melted into the soft touch of the sheets. It was still morning, approaching lunchtime, but I felt drained like I'd spent a full day running around. I took several deep breaths to try and calm my pounding heart, which had gone crazy after the encounter with Derek. Suddenly, I burst out laughing. Somehow I'm still alive. I guess my repeated efforts to make at least some progress in the game hadn't been completely wasted. I'd actually had the presence of mind to address Derek as Lord Derek, despite how flustered I was. As the tension left my body, I began to remember snippets of information about the game. When I'd first started the game, Derek's affection score had fluctuated heavily. Unlike the other male protagonists, I'd managed to select the right dialogue and increase his affection score with some difficulty. But one little mistake was often enough to undo all my hard work. I simply hadn't been able to figure out what triggered the drop in affection. Does he have some sort of personality disorder? I wondered. Why the roller coaster ride? I only found the reason after multiple deaths. Derek hated Penelope so much that he even hated hearing her call him brother. Whenever I chose a dialogue option with the word brother in it, the affection score would drop, puzzling me. "He's so finicky. Even worse than my own older half-brother," I said, frowning and clucking my tongue. In any case, it was only because I'd remembered this about him at the last moment that I was still alive. "I'll never call him brother ever again." I repeated this to myself multiple times so I wouldn't forget. I would avoid him completely if I could, of course. But I had to be ready for details in the story I didn't know about. My eyes began to close as I lay in bed thinking, I need to eat something. Food would provide much needed energy. It was nearly lunchtime already, but because of the shock of this morning, I didn't really feel hungry. Oh, whatever. Feeling too tired to do anything, I simply closed my eyes. Sleep before food. Maybe I just wanted to forget the horrible reality I had found myself in. I was deep asleep not long after I closed my eyes. "Why is this in your room?" said a cold voice surprisingly close to my ear. A different voice shouted from beside me, "Answer him, you rat. You're the one who stole it." "Reynold," the Duke warned his cursing second son. Reynold shut up but stamped his foot angrily. "What the hell is this?" I looked around before lowering my head. I seemed to be shorter, my hands smaller. The realization hit me immediately. I was in Penelope's dream. "Tell me, Penelope, why do you have my daughter's necklace? I seem to remember telling you that her room was off limits." "Father, what need is there to ask? That girl stole it," Reynold said accusingly despite the Duke's warning. Penelope glared at Reynold. "I didn't steal it. I haven't stolen anything. Don't be ridiculous. Why was Father's birthday present to Ivan inside a drawer in your room then?" Reynold shouted, shoving the necklace in her face. I'd never seen it before. As was expected of her personality, Penelope shook her head and argued, "I don't know. I was never in that room." "I saw her," someone said, stepping through the crowd of people that had gathered. The Duke, who'd been groaning as Reynold and Penelope screamed at each other, turned to look. "Penel, it was the butler. I noticed Lady Penelope going up to the 3rd floor, often these past few weeks. I checked Lady Ivan's room just in case and found the door unlocked." Everyone now turned to Penelope again, dozens of eyes all focusing on the little girl. Even the arrogant Penelope could not ignore the accusation in all those eyes. It wasn't me," she said, backing away. It was true she'd gone up to the 3rd floor often. It was the least frequented of all the places in the manor, and also led to the attic, but she'd only done so because she didn't want to be alone with the maid who harassed her, not to steal anything, especially not something that had once belonged to the Duke's real daughter. "It really wasn't me, Father. I never went into that room," Penelope shouted at the Count desperately. This was a display of trust and affection for the man who'd adopted her. The Duke was cold to her desperate cries, however. "Penel, lock all the doors on the 3rd floor and nail the door to Ivan's room shut." "Yes, Your Grace. Summon the jeweler tomorrow." "Father," faltered Penelope. The incident, which had happened not long after Penelope was adopted, was concluded without any regard for what she had to say. Penelope, frozen and pale, simply gazed at the Duke, but he said nothing to her as he left. "You should have gotten the hell out of our house when I asked you nicely, stupid bitch," Reynold whispered nastily when his father was gone. Then he shoved Penelope to the floor before following after the Duke. "Scum," Derek spat coldly at the girl slumped on the floor. The scene shifted. After that, Penelope purchased an immense number of jewels and valuables from the merchants that visited the house. The servants nearly passed out at the amount of money that changed hands, and Derek and Reynold had blustered that she had no right to spend so lavishly, and Penelope had never called the Duke father again. Knock. Knock. The quiet knocking pulled me out of my deep slumber. I opened my eyes wearily. Knock, knock. The knocking came again when I didn't respond. The rapping on the door was sharp, almost irritable. I pulled myself up slowly. "Who's click?" The door swung open before I could even ask who it was. "My lady." "It's me." Bright light poured into the room. The sun seemed to have set as my room was dark. I found the sudden light blinding. Squinting, I stared at the person who'd opened the door. "The butler," I muttered. "I have come regarding an urgent matter." It wasn't a commonplace occurrence for the butler to seek out Penelope so urgently, so my stomach plummeted. The dream I'd just woken from probably heightened my anxiety. What would that be? Had the stepbrothers maligned me again? Was I being accused of something? My voice trembled, making me feel like a fool. The butler finally provided an explanation for why he had rudely thrown open the door. "I believe we need to pick a new personal maid for you before dinner." I felt my mind go blank. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. The butler stopped speaking. He seemed offended that I'd interrupted him, judging from the frown lining his forehead. "That's it. Sadly enough, the first feeling I experienced was relief, though it was quickly replaced with rage. He threw open my door without permission over the selection of a stupid maid. The more I thought about it, the more incredulous I felt. "Look here, butler," I said in a low voice. "Yes, my lady. What is your name?" "I'm sorry," he said stupidly, not having expected the question at all. I generously repeated myself. "I asked you for your name, Penel, my lady. And what is my name, my lady?" "Why these questions?" he asked, looking displeased that I was changing the subject. The creases in his brow deepened. "Answer my question. What is my name?" "Penelope Eckhart, my lady," he finally said unwillingly. "Yes, Penelope Eckhart. I am a noble," I said, nodding and emphasizing my name. I continued quietly. "I have never heard of a commoner, let alone a servant, just throwing open the door of a noblewoman, and in her own home no less. Is that perhaps a new form of etiquette I haven't heard about, butler?" Penelope was a stupid girl. If this kind of treatment had made her angry, she shouldn't have thrown screaming fits, but instead should have brandished her social status as a weapon to make sure the servants knew their place. She was an officially adopted member of the Duke's family. It was the perfect weapon to use against the butler. Penelope's position was much stronger than mine in the real world, that of some wealthy family's illegitimate daughter. You know, if a male servant keeps frequenting the room of a young girl of the aristocracy, why, that sounds like far-fetched gossip popular among the common folk. "Isn't that right?" I asked, smiling innocently. Social status proved an amazingly effective deterrent. "My lady," the butler blanched in fear. Such a rumor would certainly have disastrous consequences for him. Chapter 9. It was satisfying seeing the butler's haughty expression waver uncertainly. I wiped the smile off my face and murmured, "And must I remind you each time that I don't appreciate looking up at you when I speak?" This was a roundabout expression, often used by the highest-ranking aristocrats in the game, who seldom experienced being spoken to without the speaker first kneeling before them. This would include, for example, Duke Eckhart, who bowed his head to no one except for members of the imperial family. "I'm sorry, my lady." The butler seemed to quickly understand my meaning. He collapsed to the floor, his stiff legs seeming to turn to jelly. I grew careless in my haste and overstepped my bounds. "Pray forgive me." Seeing the man on his knees made me feel a little better. I'd been having a terrible day since the moment I woke up. I did wonder if I was being too harsh, as the butler was much older than I was, but I didn't tell him to get up. No doubt this butler had done nothing but talk down to Penelope and ignore her these past 6 years. "You know, I don't think I'd appreciate seeing your face again any time soon," I said, staring coldly at him as he kneeled. "I'm sure you feel the same." At last I arrived at what I really wanted to say. "If you need something from me, you needn't come in person from now on. Send someone else. But my lady, selecting the maids in this manner is my resp. Yes or no?" I said, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear any other response from you." "Yes, understood, my lady," said the butler, agreeing with great effort. It showed on his face how difficult it was for him to just defer to me. "But first I should arrange dinner." "No, get out," I spat. I lay back down, my back turned toward him. I could soon hear his cautious footsteps retreating from the room. Creak! The door closed much more softly than it had been opened, and the room was plunged back into darkness. I was suddenly worried that the butler might go straight to the Duke and tell him everything I'd said. Well, it's not like I can do anything about it now. Let him do as he would. I couldn't stop him, and I would do the same over and over again if it would help ease some of Penelope's built-up resentment. Besides, I'd spoken quietly the whole time without throwing anything or screaming in his face. Inside the game, you were meant to build a good reputation by improving your relationships with the other characters as the story progressed. This would later aid you in reaching various endings with each of the male protagonists. I had no intention of playing the game in an orthodox manner, though. I didn't need to accomplish multiple endings, which meant any time I spent on irrelevant people was time wasted. I'm busy enough keeping the affection scores from falling below 0. My reputation doesn't concern me. That was a luxury you could only afford when playing the game on a phone. Shoving aside my useless musings, I closed my eyes again. I hadn't been able to sleep properly since I'd woken up as Penelope, and the butler had interrupted my nap. I needed more rest. Penelope seemed to be quite the early bird for a villain. My eyes opened early in the morning, even though there was no maid to wake me. I got out of bed and did a set of light stretches. Someone knocked on my door like they'd been waiting for me to wake. Knock, knock. I sat on my bed and stared at the door. I was curious whether yesterday's warning had been effective. It didn't seem to be the butler, that was for certain. The door didn't fly open like last time. "Who's there?" I finally said. My lady, it's me, Raina. Raina was the head maid. My new tactic had worked splendidly, and I was satisfied with the results. Come in. The door clicked open, and a middle-aged woman stepped inside. Did you sleep well, my lady? What do you want? I've come to speak to you about selecting a new personal maid. Do you happen to have someone specific in mind for the role? Of course I don't. I said nothing in response, but she seemed to have expected this. She didn't suggest that I select another maid from the existing staff, either. If you have no one particular in mind, perhaps a new maid can be hired. The one that was serving me before, what was her name? You mean Emily, my lady? Ah, yes, Emily, I said, pretending to have forgotten. Has she been kicked out of the manor? No, she hasn't, but then what is she doing now? I interrupted. The maid looked suspicious at the question. She failed to serve you properly. She faces 3 months of reduced pay and will work in the laundry. Is that so? But why do you ask, my lady? There was a faint flicker of unease in the maid's expression, despite her composure so far. I guess she knows what's been going on. Or perhaps she was the mastermind behind the whole plot. I resisted the urge to laugh and said calmly, let her continue as my personal maid. I'm sorry. It's inconvenient having no one around to serve me. Whoever we hire will be a new maid, and it'll take time for her to learn the work. I prefer someone already experienced. Penelope would never have provided such a detailed explanation, but since I needed the maid's cooperation for my own ends, I decided to play nice. You understand what I'm saying, correct? Send her up, please. I smiled at the maid whose jaw was hanging open. She seemed shocked by the change in me, and after some thought she said cautiously, but my lady, she committed a dire offence against you, and her punishment was ordered by Lord Reynolds himself. So what? Are you refusing to do as I say? I said, interrupting her excuses. The maid clammed up immediately. This was good, though it was only my second day in the manor. I'd already seen that no one ever did as Penelope asked the first time. Has it always been like this? The hierarchical societies I'd seen in movies and books had never allowed for servants questioning those of higher status. Besides, the servants that had cared for the heroine in normal mode were endlessly accommodating, which indicated that whatever this was, it wasn't normal. My good mood was replaced by irritation in less than a minute. Do as I say while I'm still asking nicely. I'd even said please. Did I have to act like the real Penelope? I already told you finding a new maid is inconvenient. Send her up as I instructed, unless you wish to attend to me yourself. In that case, I shall bring the matter to the Duke first, my lady. The head maid was refusing to do as I asked. I laughed, incredulous at her confidence. No, there is no need. In fact, I'll go see him right now. I stood abruptly. While I'm at it, I'll give him all the details of what happened yesterday and tell him that I've forgiven Emily. Where is father? I asked, starting to leave. My lady, the maid's eyes had gone wide. Things had ended somewhat peacefully with only one maid demoted. But if I told the Duke the truth, things could rapidly get out of hand. The maid had abused the Duke's daughter, and the Duke's second son had witnessed it to boot. The Duke left for the palace early this morning, she stammered. Really? All right, I'll tell him when I shall bring Emily right away. The maid interrupted frantically, apparently afraid that I would set out in search of my father. It's my age, my lady. It's making me fretful. I didn't understand how generous your intentions were. Please forgive me. It didn't please me so much as make me feel bitter to see the head maid now bowing her head. I had no intention of improving my reputation by being nice to the servants, but this felt like I was eating away at what little reputation I already possessed. Shall I bring her right now, my lady? The maid asked, looking fearful. I don't want to repeat myself to you ever again, Raina, I said, my tone somewhat mournful. My day was already ruined beyond repair. Get out. The head maid must have done as I asked. Emily immediately came to my room with breakfast. My lady, I shall prepare breakfast for you. Her hands were trembling as she set out the plates under my watchful gaze. She seemed to have had a difficult time after being dragged away the day before. The insanity of actually eating the rotten food apparently hadn't been for naught. The food she served me this time looked palatable. It was fresh salad and a juicy-looking steak. Looks edible at least. The stress from the day before hadn't dissipated just yet. I didn't really feel like eating. I stared at Emily deliberately, who was standing stiffly to the side, as I slowly ate. She didn't dare meet my eyes, of course. Maybe she feels guilty. No doubt she was busy trying to figure out why I'd chosen to keep her on as my personal maid. I hadn't even finished half of my food before I was putting my fork back down. Emily, yes, my lady, she said, her voice much too loud. She'd no doubt been caught up in her thoughts. I held out a hand. Hand me the needle, would you? I'm sorry. What do you? The needle you poked me with every morning, I said affably. She gasped. My friendly tone seemed to confuse her. After a moment, she suddenly went pale and fell to her knees. My lady, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thump, thump. Her forehead banged against the floor as she begged. What? If she was going to buckle so quickly, why did she do it in the first place? I was surprised to see how timid she seemed. My mood worsened at the confirmation of my suspicions. Someone else was behind the abuse. Any desire to wheedle what I wanted out of her vanished, and my voice turned harsh. Didn't the head maid tell you? I dislike having to repeat myself. My lady, give me the needle. Chapter 10. Emily was trembling hard. In fact, she looked like she might faint at any moment. Giving into pressure, however, she began to feel around in her hair, which was styled in a bun. Soon a huge needle emerged, clutched between her fingers. Oh my, what a clever hiding place. No wonder Penelope had fallen victim to their plotting. There would have been no easy way to find evidence the maid had been pricking her. Here you are, Emily said, her hand quivering as she held out the needle. I looked down at the object that had been used to stab Penelope for years. It was a tiny thing, not even large enough to make a fist around, but I knew from experience what terrible pain the slim point could inflict. It must have hurt so much. Penelope had likely woken in pain every morning and discovered her arm covered in wounds, both fresh and old, with no one ever paying any mind to her suffering. Raise your head, I commanded through gritted teeth. Emily hesitantly did so. Her eyes were full of despair, no doubt imagining what atrocities she would be subjected to at the hands of the Duke's vicious daughter. Sadly, however, what I was about to do wasn't exactly revenge for Penelope. Watch closely, Emily. I held out the hand that wasn't holding the needle, showing her the smooth, uninjured surface. Then I plunged the needle into it. Oh my lady, Emily screamed as if she were the one who'd been stabbed. More than half of the needle had sunk into my hand, and I immediately pulled it back out. Ugh. A bead of blood began to well up from the small wound. I'd been prepared for the pain, but it still hurt like hell. There were tears forming in my eyes. However, I showed no signs of my discomfort as I plunged the needle back into my hand. I shouted. The pain was too great to hold my cry in this time. My lady, Emily, was hyperventilating. I almost found it funny the way she cried, not knowing what to do with herself in the face of my unexpected behavior. She's been doing this to me every day. Why is she so shocked? Oh, my lady, why are you doing this? No need to cry, Emily. After all, you made these wounds, I said softly as she burst into tears, her face drained of all expression at my words. I'm sorry. I don't understand. There are only 2 wounds in my hand now, but there could easily be 3, 4, or even 5. She stopped breathing altogether, and her trembling stopped as well. From now on, I will accept anything you prepare for me without question. The water you bring me to wash my face with in the morning, clothes, food, everything. My lady, and who knows, depending on whether you tamper with those things, the number of puncture wounds in my hand might increase, and at some point, someone will notice these wounds. Don't you agree? Then they'll wonder, who is the impudent individual that dares to abuse a lady of the House of Eckhart? Someone like Reynolds, for example. I smiled widely, overly pleasant, as I continued. All that depends on how you act from now on. My personal maid said nothing in response to my threat. She was so pale that she looked like she'd just been strangled. Stand up. I'm finished with my meal. Time for you to get to work, I said, withdrawing my hand. Then I turned lazily to the large window next to the table. Emily, who'd been frozen in place kneeling on the floor, jumped to her feet and mechanically gathered the dishes. I guess she got the message. I was relieved. It would be easy to make use of her from now on. My situation wouldn't be improved by hiring someone new as my personal maid. Since I refused to continue being bullied, I'd decided instead to turn Emily into a pawn I could use. As the one who'd been responsible for physically abusing Penelope, she provided me with the perfect opportunity. I also liked how she crumbled under the slightest pressure. Not that refusing me was an option even available to her under the circumstances. I watched Emily as I thought about these things. She continued to busy herself around the table, and soon finished her work. Slam! That was when someone kicked the door open so hard, I thought it should have splintered apart. I turned with a jolt of shock, and caught sight of lovely pink hair. Penelope Eckhart, the nasty second son of the Duke, was glaring at me. He rushed into the room. The words affection score 3% were soon hovering in my face. What the hell are you thinking? Reynolds demanded, furious malcontent radiating off him. When he noticed Emily standing next to the table, his mood seemed to worsen. You're my lord. Emily froze, the colour draining from her face. I quickly checked the table and saw that all the tableware had been gathered on a tray, with the exception of a lone fork left in front of me. Oh no! Feeling an ominous sense of foreboding, I quickly moved the fork to the tray as well. I then scanned around me again, just in case there remained anything that could be used as a weapon. "You may leave, Emily," I said. Emily immediately picked up the tray, as if she'd been eagerly awaiting permission to do so. "Where do you think you're going?" Reynolds shouted angrily. "Go on," I said, giving Emily a look that said she should get out before the young master threw a fit. The maid seemed to understand and ran toward the door. I was reminded of the way I'd fled from Derek yesterday, fearing for my life. Reynolds' angry gaze settled on me after I'd sent Emily out, ignoring his protests. "Tell me, what are you scheming?" I paused for a moment to think. Inside the game, Penelope never treated Reynolds with respect. Reynolds was 2 years older than her, so given their similarity in age, it was to be expected that they'd bicker often, just like me and the younger of my asshole brothers. Unlike Penelope, I hadn't fought back viciously, of course. I'd simply allowed myself to be bullied. In any case, I wondered if I should be formal and polite with him just as I'd been with Derek, since he was older than me, but soon thought better of it. It would be silly for me to suddenly start deferring to him when I'd been talking back just yesterday. "So you're going to ignore me now, is that it?" Reynolds said sarcastically, fuming because I wasn't answering immediately. "God, he can be so impatient." I responded casually, as the real Penelope would. "What do you mean? Why did you take that girl back as your personal maid?" he asked. The words "affection score 3% gleamed threateningly from above the fluttering strands of his pink hair. What response would allow me to avoid death? I wondered if I should turn on the dialogue options now, but it was already too late. It would have been no use anyway. The choices would just have been crazy ones like before. I gulped, looking at Reynolds as he fumed. Penelope would likely have said something that would hasten her death, something along the lines of "piss off" or "get out of my room." "It's nothing, pay it no mind." But I wasn't Penelope, so I softened my tone. Reynolds would be disagreeable regardless of what I said. I had a feeling that maybe things would go over better this time if I chose a different approach. "What did you say?" Apparently, the effect was the opposite to what I'd hoped for. His eyes gleamed maliciously. "It's nothing." "Is it nothing that she fed her mistress rotten food?" "No, that's..." "She dared hold the house of Eckhart in contempt. How dare she, that low-born wretch? Oh, we have no need for such an impudent maid in this manor. There is no end to the amount of people out there who would willingly die for a chance to work in this house." Reynolds fumed. I was at a loss in the face of his unexpected response. In fact, he seemed angrier than me, the actual victim. I giggled. "How dare you, you low-born wretch?" That was what Reynolds had always said to Penelope. "You're laughing?" he asked, a scowl on his face. "Consider how much of a pushover you must have seemed for a maid to treat you that way." He was right. Nobody gave me any respect, and none of the servants seemed willing to do as I told them to. My heart, which had been swirling with the fear of death that might come at any moment, suddenly calmed. "I met with Father about the matter yesterday, actually." I looked at him with colder eyes than before. "Yes, I'm sure Father agreed as well. I told the servants to kick that impertinent maid out immediately," Reynolds said, puffing his chest out like he was proud of what he'd done. Could he be seeking praise from the fake sister he despised so much? Sadly, I had zero intention of offering any. Actually, Father and Derek didn't wish for Emily to be kicked out. "What?" Reynolds said incredulously, his blue eyes widening. "Father and Derek